Welcome to Forestry Now, where we explore the forces impacting profitable and sustainable management of commercial forests and natural woodlands. I'm Dermot McNally. The fallout from Storm Darragh and Eowyn has been monumental for the Irish forestry industry. To get an overview of this, I speak with Victor Barber. Victor's a qualified forester who began his career with Western Forestry Co Op and is now their harvesting manager based out of Sligo. He also farms and is a regular contributor to the Farmers Journal on all things forestry. We speak about Storm Éoywn. We try to make sense of why some sites blew down and some sites didn't. We discuss the challenge harvesting windblown sites and the arrival of international harvesting crews. Finally, we talk through the export of timber in containers and how prices are holding up for the owners of recently harvested forests. As always, find links and contact details in the show notes below and enjoy the conversation. Victor, thanks very much for joining me.
Glad to be here.
Can you explain the typical harvesting method or service that you offer to customers of Western Forestry?
So I suppose just to give you a bit of background, I suppose, look, the first harvesting jobs that we would have been involved as Western Forestry Co Op, we would have sold the timber standing, and we've moved on over the years where we've evolved, and now we sell all our customers' timber delivered in or at the very least roadside. That basically means that we are in control of the actual harvesting that takes place on the site. So those contractors that are cutting the owner's timber are employed directly by Western Forestry Co Op. They work for us all year round, so they have reliability in that they have work coming up. And then so we have the reliability that they're going to be there to do our jobs as well. The service we offer, we basically come in organising the harvesting contractor to come onto the site at an agreed rate and then to actually harvest the timber and sell all the timber on behalf of the owner. On a normal given site, the timber will probably end up in 4 or 5 different mills is the normal thing. We sell timber to anyone that basically wants to buy timber in the island of Ireland. I suppose the way I describe it is the more products you have, the more use you're making the timber, is to try and maximise the amount of money you can actually get out of it. You know, there are similarities to it in butchering. You know, you're trying to cut the tree up into the best, most productive method to make the most money out of it for the owner. And it's nice to see all the timber going to an actual productive use and going to mills that want that particular product. That's the timber side of it. I suppose, look, it's far more to it than just selling the timber. It's about all the legalities around that, got to do with the environment, water, setbacks. It's giving the owner peace of mind that everything that they're doing is within the rules and it's been done the proper way. Again, to try and describe it to someone, like harvesting a sale of timber is a very complex thing. And I would sometimes compare it to, it's like a one-off person building a house for the first time you ever do it. It's extremely tricky and complex. And I suppose selling timber for the first time is the same as that. So it's why would you bring in a project manager? Why would you bring in a lead on building your own house? It's to take all the problems and complexities out of it and that you end up with a job running smoothly and according to plan, that there's no nasty surprises along the way.
And just to tease out one aspect, you mentioned that some customers might go for a roadside price, whereas in the normal sense, I think you're selling to the mills. Why would some customers prefer to take a roadside service?
Well, they'll be guided by ourselves, or a bit most, I suppose, 90% of what we sell is delivered in. So it's just we have individual customers that we would trust a lot and maybe they're set up. And again, it's just to get the best out of it for the owner that we're selling for. And they might be the best mill that they have their own system of picking up timber. So it might be just to suit that and to work with them on the job. So it is, but predominantly it's delivered into the mills. So it's to bring, and for us, it's about having the control over the whole cycle, the whole getting the timber from the site to the mill, that to organise the haul here. So we know who's coming and going and when they're going to come and go. It's the idea behind that.
Very good. Okay. So prior to Storm Darragh and Eowyn, how many harvesting crews were regularly working for Western?
We would have been 2023, 24, Dermot, we would have been in around 5 or 6 machines, give or take, for the whole year through, which we're busy. It's, when you're dealing with private one-off sites, our main customer is an average of the national average, about 5 or 6 hectares. When you take off the broadleaves and take off the setbacks, you're dealing with maybe 3 or 4 hectares of spruce timber, which relates back to, maybe 1,500, 1,800 ton of timber. So it's a lot of organising. You're always on the move. It's the next job and the next job and the next job. It's not like maybe if you compare it to Quilcha sites where you'd be taking down maybe 20 hectares or less at each time. So there's just more logistics in managing our typical customer. So there is.
Okay, and then just how many harvesting crews have you working for Western at the minute since, or at this point, Victor, just?
So 25, we would have had up to 11 there during the summer. Dermot was our peak, and we're probably back down now at 7 or 8 there at the moment, which, it's enough. It's been an absolutely crazy year. There is no other way to describe it. It's totally turned everything on its head, what we were used to and the normal way of doing business. It has been a crazy year. It's the only way to describe it.
Victor, are you still working with international crews, or are the extras local crews?
Yes, we have international crews with us. We have the main international crews who are with us there at the moment, Dermot, are the Romanian drivers. They're managed by Dutch, but they're Romanian drivers. And they have a serious interest in the job. They were brought up with this. They take their pride in it. It's phenomenal. So yeah, we're really delighted to have them on board. They brought a really good standard of work with them. Of course, there's been an adaptation to the Irish climate to get used to that. But I have to say, look, from our point of view, they took it on and they listened. Yes, there was a bedding in period there when the weather changed in September. All contractors had a good time of it during the summer, where there was, it was very easy to manage from an environmental point of view. But as soon as September kicked in the northwest, the normal Irish weather returned. So it has been a learning curve for them, But I have to say they've stuck to it very well. So
Brilliant. Okay, and any language issues, Victor, or they all speak English?
There is, of course, Dermot, absolutely. And look, I suppose the language problems is probably more on our side than their side, in that we have one language and that's it. Whereas most of them have at least half English along with their native. There is times that it goes back to Google Translate, and but there's always one member of the team that hear that is perfect English, because it's essential when you're dealing with environmental considerations. It's the fine detail that makes the difference. Close enough just won't do when you're dealing with environmental situations. So yeah, it's always very important to have one person at the crew that's fully on board and understands English, and they translate back to the rest of the crew if there's any. It's the only way around it. So it is.
We'll get back to the conversation with Victor in a second. But if you're in the market for forestry lands, go to forestsales.ie, where you'll find forests for sale across the country and all the information you need to make a decision. That's forestsales.ie. Now, back to the interview with Victor Barber of Western Forestry. Now, let's move on then to talk about the forest that had windblow. Could you point out, or could you describe an obvious pattern in terms of which sites blew down and why?
Yeah, look, from my own point of view, Dermot, we were always very conservative at thinning here in the northwest because of the depth of the soil, and we'd seen a small amount of wind blow over the years. So we were conservative, and that had stood us very well with our customers, in that we'd very little issues in wind blowing timber over the last number of years, which it was great. We didn't have a big problem with wind blow. Look, at this storm really threw things on its head. None of the rules applied. I wish I could sit here and say that the ones that we never thinned stood the storm. They didn't. If it was in the path and if it was in the area, that central northwest area, they came down the same way as the thin ones. So there was, I don't think anyone could say there was any situation that really dealt with it better than others. If the odd real sheltered location survived, or the odd really, really wind firm deep rooting site survived, but in the main, anything that was in that central northwestern area got hammered, basically.
And is there an age profile then, Victor? Would you say that sites that were thinned or unthinned under 25 stud, or could you say that the problem is predominantly in sites over X years of age?
Yeah, so it's very safe to say Dermot, that anything between 20 years plus, tinder on thinned, really came out of this really badly. So that anything that was kind of above 14, 15 meters really. I suppose age is irrelevant. It's the height of the trees is different. So anything above that kind of 13, 14 meters really, really come in for a hard time, which matches up with kind of 20 years plus. Yes, if it was thinned, it definitely came down easier. But again, going back, we had plenty of stands that were never thinned and they ended up on the ground as well. So it was like, I says, look, there is a lot of talk about climate and weather, but the reality is that was a storm like we never had before, in that it was so widespread in the northwest. It wasn't just a very, very localized storm where it might have hit a few townlands. It was widespread. So that was the big difference. So it was.
Okay. And is it obvious enough to say that broadleaf plantations were broadly unaffected?
Yeah, it's a fair comment, but I suppose people are missing the point maybe really why they were unaffected. Dermot, in general, broadleafs, they obviously have no leaves in the winter. So this was a midwinter. It was the end of January storm. So they've no leaves, like the conifers hold their needles the whole year. So there's something there for the wind to catch. And generally speaking, the broadleaves are never as tall as spruce plantations. Generally, broadleaf plantations, if they're running around 12, 13, 14 meters, that's their max height. So again, it's the laws of gravity kick in here. They don't have as much to catch in the winter. And yeah, they're just not as tall, and they were safer. And look around the countryside after any of the mature stuff that was out there, broadleaves, it got really badly affected as well. We all know big trees that have been there for the last couple of 100 years, still in full health, but they had the height and they had the mass for the wind to catch, and they suffered as well. I don't think it's something that you can say conifers were affected more than broadleaves. It goes back to just their shape and size and their top height.
Yeah, very good. Okay. Now, on a typical conifer site then that has been windblown, can you describe to someone who's not familiar with the harvesting process why it is so much slower to harvest a windblown than a site that hasn't been affected?
Yeah, so I suppose to start off, again, go back to thinned and unthinned. Obviously, the more stems that's on it, this storm seems to have, normally windblow would knock the trees all in one direction. For some reason, this storm, when you go into a windblown site, the trees can be 3 different directions. So it's nearly like a bowl of spaghetti that the trees are all overlapping each other. So when the harvester comes along to grab those trees, they have to sort out that, and you just cannot grab. So a lot of the time you can't even see the root blade, or the stem of the tree that the harvester has to grab. You have to cut other trees from around it. So it's a real jigsaw puzzle that the harvester driver has to sort out. It takes even longer. If the site was never thinned, well, then you're going to be up around 2,000 stems to the hectare. So that adds more time to it and slows it down even further. Now, if the site was thinned 2 or 3 times, it is a big help. It leaves it easier. Still challenging, but it leaves it that bit easier. But on average, across the board, I would say if you have 50% of normal production, Dermot, in a windblown stand, that's a good driver. That's a very capable driver. That's just literally where it's at. You'd be down 50% production each day.
Okay, so it's taken them a good bit longer to get through it, basically.
Absolutely, yeah. And it's immense amount of patience that's required, and it is really tested. And look, from our harvesting contractor's point of view, I am really delighted with them for the year. It takes real patience and time and effort to keep the momentum up, because you have to get every single stick of timber that you pull out. You have to be on top of your game to do the best you can with it. It's if your complacency sets in, the owner is the loser. So it is.
Yeah. Okay. And if your contractor has harvesting machines and forwarders, but the harvesting is much slower, does that leave forwarding machines sitting idle somewhere, Victor, that don't have work to do then?
No, it doesn't. Well, it hasn't this year. No, it has worked out all right that time, that way. I suppose, look at the harvesters that's there. They're still high capacity machines. So there. And the forwarder, There's always work to be doing, and especially when September kicked in, where the weather turned, a forwarder could spend up in bad weather, spending 3-4 hours of its day putting down brash to maintain the site and maintain the soil isn't getting damaged. So there's a huge amount of the day gone at that alone. So there is, yes, of course, there's always going to be odd sites, which is very tricky, and the forwarder might have been having less to do, but yeah, in general, that works out grand.
Okay. And then Clearfell before Windblow and after Windblow, is the recovery rate of saleable timber noticeably different on windblown sites?
And again, I say it at every field day we do, Dermot, and I emphasise it again and again, and that really is dependent on the harvester driver that's on the machine. They have such an influence in that. But definitely in an on-the-in site, they are extremely gentle, and some of the worst ones that I've seen this year, where they have windblow 3 different ways, maybe with an increase of maybe pulp going up 10%. But in general, as the months went by and the lads got a better handle on it as go along, I'd like to think that we're still getting absolute maximum recovery out of the site. And the material that's going into pulp because of the storm is less than 5%, and usually that's down to a snap in the site, or where the timber was damaged, or simply the trees just couldn't be got out without taking a length of pulp off one of them, or where the harvester had to cut a track in. And in general, at the moment for 2025, Dermot, the recovery it has been very good. Like it hasn't had a big effect on the recovery of usable timber.
Brilliant. Okay. And then the next question, Victor, is it harder to recover brash from a site that is windblown, or is it more or less the same?
It is. And again, that's totally weather related. During the summer was fine, so there was no problem recovering brash during the summer. For some reason, on windblow sites, and I can't really explain it, but the brash does seem to be scarcer. There doesn't seem to be as much of it. But yeah, look at the moment, we'd be using a lot of brash just to maintain the sites and keep them in proper environmental order, that there's no damage been done to the soils at the moment. There's very little brash being recovered off sites at the moment, and probably will remain the same for the winter. And there's a good few sites that we've just taken the decision it's not worthwhile for anyone recovering the little bit of brash that's left on them. And the brash, I suppose, is widely known. It is a low value, low quality product. So it is running into bother in Ireland at the moment, as far as the home is concerned. Eamon Derry been the main user of that. And they are, yes, I suppose it's widely known. They have a lot of stuff in their yard at the moment. So there is pressure coming on it.
Okay, very good. And just one more question on the timber coming out of its side of it. Is there any demand or special demand for certified forests, or is that even an issue for the buyers?
So look, I'll only speak for ourselves, Western Forestry Co Op here, just the way we have found it. And we're selling timber at the moment through agents to China, to Europe, and obviously the home market, as we've always and will continue to prioritise. But certification hasn't been an issue for us this year. There has come no timber buyer to us offer more money from anywhere in the world, offer us more money for certified timber than rather uncertified. And that's just our experience on it, Darth. So it is.
Very good. Okay, well, you mentioned China and Europe, and I think that's a new thing. So can you just talk through the process that led to Irish timber being exported in containers off the island of Ireland then?
Yeah, so look at it is totally and utterly a direct result of the storm. I suppose there had been bits and pieces happening over the years as far as exported timber is concerned. But I suppose what's quite obvious after that now, Ireland had a healthy Irish timber market and the prices were quite good. I know we experienced some record highs during COVID years, but aside from that, we had a healthy market. So the result been in that we have, after the storm, we've had maybe 3-4 years work all ready to go at once. So an oversupply of timber. The Irish sawmilling industry has reacted and dealt with the problem extremely well all year, in that they've taken a huge volume of stuff all year and allowed the timber to keep moving. But there is just basically too much timber there at the moment to be all consumed, and especially that mid-range product where you're what we would traditionally call pallet wood. It's a word I don't like using because a lot of the time it never ends up in pallets, but that's just the industry term for it. So you have a 2.5, a 3.1 and a 3.7 pallet. And because there's so many younger plantations been harvested, that has been oversupplied this year and will be oversupplied next year as well. So all that has led to an oversupply. So to use it, the overseas market has been looked at, and that has resulted in some companies exporting by boat out of different ports around Ireland and by container to which really can end up anywhere in the world. So it can. So there's an appetite across the world for timber. The logistics is the problem.
Let me pause the conversation for a second to ask you this. Could your business benefit from increased profile in the forestry sector? Well, if so, maybe you should be considering advertising on Ireland's only dedicated forestry podcast, with new episodes coming out every 2 weeks. So get in touch with Forestry Now to see how we can make it work for you. Back to the chat with Victor. Yeah, let's move on to that logistics then. First question though, you mentioned bringing in international crews, Romanian drivers, Dutch maybe management. Are they the people that are buying the timber and exporting it? Or who are you selling the timber to that's going abroad?
The setup is basically that these are European companies and they specialise in tidying up after storms. So big natural weather events that happen all around the year, all around the world, every year. So there's a storm in Ireland, January gone past. It could have been in Sweden the year before. It could have been in Hungary the year before that. And they react and they go and they buy timber and they sell it to the rest of the world. So they're spent their whole lives at this. So they're professionals at this. They know how it works. They have the logistics set up. They have the relationship set up with the timber buyers. So they're the middle person that we're there is different ways of doing it. But I suppose for us, I don't see this as a long-term thing. So I don't see it worth our while heading for China to set up new relationships with new business. Because when the price of timber does return to normal, this market will probably close off again.
So basically, this is totally price dependent. Once the price dropped to a certain point, then it became viable for these guys to buy it and take it abroad.
Yes, that's the essential part there. That the price had to get to a situation that it was viable for them to get in. Because look at just a couple of quick rough costs, like to send timber to Europe, no matter how you send it, is probably looking at about 60 euros a tonne, 50, 60 euros a tonne. So it's admirable. It's in bulk cargo. Timber is not a hugely valuable product. So it's expensive to move. So it is. So when you take the price of timber and put 50, 60 euros a tonne onto it, that's making it very expensive to send her to the other side of the world or wherever it be.
Okay. Well, let's talk about getting the timber that you've now harvested on a windblown site somewhere in Leitrim, let's say. How do you get that from roadside and into containers that's going to be brought to the docks and then shipped?
So it was a lot of the companies that came in started off with what they traditionally would have done in a lot of companies or a lot of countries in Europe. They would come to the site and load the timber off the forest road into the container and then send it from there to Dublin. We tried this ourselves with these companies, and for us, it just became very apparent very quickly that this is not going to work. You're dealing in the rural northwest. The road infrastructure wasn't there. I suppose it also has made us appreciate the Irish hauliers a little bit more in their level of skill and competency, that when you were bringing drivers that weren't used to forests, they struggled during big time. So just from a health and safety point of view was the main driving thing behind this. We knew this was going to have to cease. So we returned then to where the timber is now delivered into yards, private yards. That's good access, good location, close to the N4. We deliver the timber into that yard, let it be by the cubic metre or by the tonne or whatever the system is, it's been sold. Our normal hauliers call to the ones, collect that timber and drop it into these yards, and then it's been able to load it into the container in a safe working conditions, and off it goes then with the normal freight hauliers that bring it to Dublin Port, and it goes onto the ship and off it goes to wherever.
Okay. And I mean, Where is the timber measured then? You have an idea from the harvesting machines how much timber has been left roadside, but how does it get measured so that the owner gets paid for what's come off their forest?
So there's been a lot of different systems working in Ireland, because everything that we have ever done in private timber sales in Ireland has always been by the ton. So we're still doing some of that with these timber that's been exported. It's by the ton. Some of it is by the cubic meter as well. So I suppose personally, Western Forestry Co Op has been using it, Dermot, as a chance to get experience in measuring timber. So to see how it's done on a European and international scale and the way they measure the timber. So it's been a great experience from that way. Some would come to the site and measure it, and then we would measure it along with them. More of it is done in timber yards where it's measured going into the containers and by the cubic meter. There's different ways. It can be done by stack measurement, or it can be done by individual logs. When we first heard that they were going measuring every single individual log, we thought it was a mad idea. And it's actually, when you see it been done and get used to it, it's quite simple and fast and efficient. So it's not impossible. So it's been a brilliant learning curve for us. And because, look, obviously the elephant in the room in Ireland in timber sales, Dermot, is the weight versus cubic meter. I have no problem in saying that we've had the best summer in 2025, weather-wise, that we've seen in a long number of years, and timber been harvested. The timber was light because it wasn't getting full moisture content up into the tree. So the timber was on the light side ever before it was harvested. And then really, really good conditions. Timber, if it sat on the side of the road for even a few days, it was beginning to lose weight. So it's something that we are going to have to work in 2026 to move away from that measured by the ton, because if you have a good summer, windblown timber, it's not suitable to be selling it by the ton. And I know there might be some in the industry won't like to be saying that, if you're a timber buyer, but I think it's widely accepted that that's the reality. It's not good for the timber seller, which is ultimately the owner. It's not good for them to be selling timber by the ton. So it's not in summer with really dry weather conditions. So we've got to move towards selling timber by the cubic meter. Now, that is quite a complex issue, and to get one cap that fits all is going to be a big challenge, but it is going to have to be a bridge that's crossed in Ireland to move away. We are not the only country. It's often put out there we're the only country still selling timber by the ton. We're not. The UK sells the majority of its timber by the ton as well. So it is something that we have to work on, though, definitely. So it is. So I think this is a good opportunity to get our heads around it. And for a private owner, it's even another step up from the great thing we love by the ton, Dermot, was that we had a weight docket every time we come back and show an owner. It's a very visible, tangible thing that you can see with your own eyes, and it's a printed piece of paper from a weighbridge. So there was a lot of trust in it. When you go into measuring timber by the cubic meter, the owner is removed from that essentially a lot of the time, and it's completely based on trust, unless they're going to come out along with us and start measuring timber on site. They don't have a lot of interaction with it. So there is more trust for the owner to get used to accept. So it's something that's going to take a fair bit of work to move it on. So it is.
Yeah. I'm guessing that you probably start to see a pattern with the haulage, that you start to see an average cubic meters on a typical haulage lorry, would you, Victor?
Absolutely, Dermot. But there's always variance in the weight of timber in Ireland. There's never two sites to say. And it's something that interests me. It's where you could have a site that has a far better conversion rate from cubic meters to tons, and the site mile down the road from it could be on the lesser side of that. Is it the soil? Is it the provenance of the tree? Why is one weighing better than the other? But there could be 10 to 15% in the difference sometimes in the weight of the timber coming off, and the site could be the same time of the year. So there's a lot of unknown there as well on those, with the reasons behind that.
Yeah, so bringing it to a volume as opposed to a weight measurement would remove a lot of that uncertainty.
It would, and it would relieve the stress of getting timber moved within a few days when it's on the side of the road. Because look at the times that we are in now with windblown timber, and we're going to be facing it for 2026 as well. And there's all kinds of logistical problems and capacity going to be still there as there was in 2025. So the great thing that would be with cubic meters is that when there's a dry week of weather next June, that there isn't panic setting in that an owner is lose a load of money because the timber isn't moved.
Am I right in saying that kilcha sell by volume, not weight, and therefore their sites are often harvested and left for a while before they're moved to the mills?
That's correct. And I suppose it takes the stress out of it for the owner. If for whatever reason that the mill can't take it at that particular week or day, that if it sits there longer, it's of no financial loss to the owner, which is the big upside. So yeah, Quilcha do sell all by the cubic metre to the big mills, yes. But they have their own system, and it's not just as easy as flicking the switch for the private sector to adapt that system just overnight. It is going to take a lot of joined up thinking to make it work. So it is.
Okay. So then, Victor, we'll just get on to trying to give an owner of a windblown site a very, very rough average of what they might net out a windblown site at per productive acre. So again, there's no such thing as a typical site, but let's imagine you've just finished harvesting a 30-year-old, fairly productive, unthinned Leitrim site that has blown. It's 10 acres of productive timber. And based on the prices you're seeing at this point, can you give someone a range of figures of what they'll end up per acre in their pocket for clearing that windblown timber?
We'll do our best, Dermot, to answer that question, but there's a certain element of how long is a piece of string to answer it. So look, at the age is everything, Dermot. What you said there, so that person with the 30-year-old stand, that person is still, it's not the end of the world for them, really financially. You still have a crop that was essentially, it was nearly mature anyways, or some people might say it was mature in the Irish market. So if it's 30-year-old, that isn't the end of the world. I suppose the real problem is that we have plantations all the way up. We have one customer with a plantation 16 years old that's blowing. So it's those younger plantations that's really going to be hit financially the worst here. If you have 30-year-old plantation, you're not in the world's worst of a place. I suppose what you have to account for here is timber prices came back in Ireland. Yes, they did come back a bit, but I suppose we have to mention the Irish timber mills could have dropped the prices a lot lower. They could have. The one thing about all the foreign European companies that came into the country, they couldn't understand why the price of timber wasn't bottoming out. So the Irish mills have done, even though I suppose maybe hindsight would be required, but they did not bottom out the market, which they could have if they wanted. The timber is oversupplied. So timber held at a fair price. The only problem is that the harvesting rates went up. Because remember, we started off the conversation, the harvesting is taking twice as long on a windblow site. So that harvester driver had no choice but to increase their prices, what they were charging, to justify their day's wages, to make money out of it. They're not here for the fun of it. They have to make money to make the business viable, the same as any business. So you have harvesting prices have gone up. And also, yes, of course, there was a price reduction, no matter where you were selling it. So the owner is getting squeezed in the middle. Now, again, going back to if you have a site that's 30 years of age and it's yielding 350 to 450 tonne, they still have performed financially okay this year. But it's those plantations that come down to 22, 23-year-old. You know, we have harvested some there this year that the returns have been as low as 5,000 a hectare. That's horrible money. So it is, to put it into perspective. I suppose we would always been managing plantations to try and get them, that they were always going to net the owner 7,000 or 8,000 an acre at minimum. That's what they were going to. If the ground was reasonably good, that's what you were aiming. And it was been done commonly. And if the ground was quite good and you had 30 plus years, if you got it at 32, 33, 34 years, that golden figure of 10,000 an acre was thrown out there, which was achievable. But it's those figures are gone for the moment. So there. It's and it's not going to improve in 2026, I don't think. It's as good as it is. It's still a bad year for forestry, so it is as far as timber prices are concerned, and that's just the reality of it. So them is the lows. I suppose, honestly, even the good stems, they're back from 20-25 a hectare. They're probably back to in around 15 a hectare this year as well, given the extra harvesting costs and the price drop in the products as well.
And then really the last question then, Victor, is what are you expecting in 2026? You've kind of talked a little bit about it there. Is there any silver lining, or what should we expect?
Oh, I don't think there's any silver lining. Look, the big thing is that we're all holding out for is to take some of the pain away for owners is the reconstitution grant that we're waiting from the department. We have had verbal commitments at meetings. I am confident the minister is going to deliver on it. It just, I suppose the time is now. It's coming into planting season again. Anything that was clear-felled and sites were cleared during the year, it's time to be getting those prepped for replanting. So we need that information from the department as soon as possible to let owners know what they're going to be entitled to or not. It will be a great assistance. It's 100% necessary. The industry needs it. It was a huge disaster. And just to give a bit of faith and confidence back into the industry to get it going again and get the next rotation going. So that's the big thing we're hoping for. Price-wise, as far as timber is concerned, look at 2026. This is just my opinion, I'll stress. I think sawlog will be okay. That mid-range pallet material will still be in bother next year. And unfortunately, pulp is going to be a difficult year for pulp next year. That seems to be a worldwide thing at the moment. The prices are not fantastic, and that doesn't seem to be changing for the first quarter of 2026 anyways, by the indications there. So it's going to be a tough year for that. I said pulp prices are back to 1990s levels as far as I'd be concerned, which is a tough place to be.
Okay, well listen, Victor, thanks very much for joining me. It's much appreciated.
No problem. Thanks, Dermot.
That's it for this podcast. Feel free to comment or subscribe for more episodes.